There are three factors that determine the likelihood of fire and oftentimes its severity within our western forest ecosystems. And those are climate, ignition, and fuel. You have to have each of them in order to have fire. While virtually all western forest ecosystems are likely to experience fire at some point, they don't always experience them at the same likelihood or intensity or frequency. But hot, dry climates are likely to experience fire at some point. That's even true in cooler mountains. So when will we have fire here in these areas, in these kinds of ecosystems where they can be the most damaging? Well, you can predict the likelihood of fire based on three environmental factors. That's temperature, relative humidity, and the wind. And that's going to determine the fire risk in the moment that you are looking at. Now let's say that you have the right climate conditions for fire. You need a source of ignition to actually have an event. Now there's lots of relief in the west, lots of mountains and topography, and going up in elevation also increases lightning ignitions, increases the lightning strikes. And this is true even for isolated mountain ranges out in the desert, you see here. But most ignitions are associated with human activity, roads, development, and recreation. And much of firefighting or fire mitigation actions are focused on reducing these ignitions. For example, this is a eastern side of the Sierra Pinyon Pine Forest that's heavily used for recreation. In many parts of the West, including this forest, lightning strikes occur and human ignitions are possible also. So in many places, our fires are associated with both ignition sources, and that just varies from moment to moment, which is the most important. Now the last factor is the one that I think is often the most obvious, and that's fuels. Now the good news about fuels is that this is the component of forests that we can manipulate. It's the one that we can manage. Sometimes that may lead us to put a little bit too much emphasis on it sometimes, hoping that we can solve our wildfire problems by manipulating fuels. That's not always possible, but it is possible to manipulate them. It's something we can do. The fuel levels vary when you look across the West, when you look across our forests. Higher productivity does tend to be associated with higher biomass and then therefore higher fuels, both actual and potential. Now the word fuels is an easy thing to say, it's an easy thing to throw out there, but we're really talking about many different parts of a forest. We're talking about living foliage, dead wood, foliage in the canopy, as well as foliage in the understory. And lastly, the trees themselves, their adaptations to the dry environment, often is associated with increased flammability. So we've got a lot of interactions here that are creating our wildfire problem. Now one of the first things that comes to mind, because it's so pervasive through the West, is the effect of fire suppression, which has increased fuels and increased the dominance of fire-sensitive trees. This has occurred in all kinds of different ecosystems that occur in the West, and it is one that gets a lot of attention. It is pervasive, it's a pervasive problem, and it's one that we can manipulate. And that's probably why there's so much focus on it. A century of management in the West has created a pervasive and widespread wildfire problem. This is a really big, steep problem to climb. It's one that simply has not been, or a solution has not been found, despite the work, despite all the effort, despite the many different kinds of approaches. It's one that really cries out for new kinds of creativity and new efforts, new focus, especially when the going gets hard, which is going to happen, which happens again and again as we go through these, as we try to solve this problem. And even every time you get a little bit higher, it's progress. Even though, and I hope that you try to deal with the wildfire problem, even though most of the time you're probably